Slow play, stalling, deep in the combat math, tanking, decision paralysis. Whatever term you use for it, there is no getting around the fact that sometimes you'll be playing a game of Commander and your lines will come to a halt. You'll reread your own cards, all of the cards on the table. You might have options, but ultimately it's taking forever. If folks ask, whose turn is it a lot when it's your turn? We have some advice for you today. And I think most people will find this chat informative. Today on Spike of the Mic, I'm going to chat a little bit about how I keep my decision making quick, keep track of the game state, and Jim's going to jump in and help us talk about how to avoid slow play. When it comes to playing fast, I don't mean to brag, but I think you'll see that I tend to play my turns at speed. I attack Jan with everything.
Oh man, this taunt.
Oh, attack me with everything.
Why would I do this?
Why would I?
So you lose no life and stay where you are.
Hang on, I'm gonna Aether Spouts. Oh, Jedi mind trick.
I don't hyperanalyze too much, and I tend to play from the make them have it school of thought. But I am going to Fire Covenant.
Oh, who's stupid now, Jerry?
How much are you Fire Covenanting for?
A lot.
Yeah.
Please choose your targets.
Yep, we're going to pay 18 life, and that'll put us to very low. We're risking it for the biscuit, as they say.
So 31 minus 18 is 13.
Go to 13.
Wow, this is backwards.
Fire Covenant targets every legal target that isn't mine or hexproof.
Oh, no.
I have no responses.
I'm sad.
I'm going to give you a bird.
Oh, right in the face. Which isn't always ideal. So keep in mind that this is a framework that helps me not be slow, not necessarily the highest win rate way to play. The first thing I'm doing whenever I notice I don't know what to do when I'm playing a game is looking for the relevant pieces of the game state. Take a few seconds and find those pieces on the board that either help me a lot or hinder me a lot. At any given time, I want to know which permanents are on my hit list and whether or not I'm ready to snap off removal. This should be an evolving process, and things that might be relevant on early turns, like an opponent's Sol Ring, tend to fade towards irrelevance by the mid-game. The ideal here is to have at least one object under each opponent's control that you can focus on as the threat. Much more than that, and you're better off thinking about and looking for, if you can, mass removal spells. The other piece to look for here is keeping track of who you can cleanly attack. Generally speaking, in a game of Commander, if a creature has an ability on it, most folks aren't going to chump with it unless it's a crunch time kind of situation. Similarly, you should be aware of what's stopping people from attacking you. So don't go sacrificing your Death Touch creature if it's the only thing between your face and a huge beater. The next piece I try to keep track of are what actions are available to me. This is everything from cards I can cast to abilities I can activate. If it's something that you could use up your priority on from the time you untap to the time you untap again, it should be thought of in this step. Realistically, most of the time, you're unlikely to have more than about 4 possible non-attack actions, only a few of which are going to be relevant at any given time. I help organize this mentally by ignoring cards that I don't have the resources to cast or activate. As soon as my available payments are too low, the card should be blank in my mind, just like that glow goes away when you're playing Arena. Similarly, if you're playing a reactive deck with lots of instant speed answers, you should consider playing at a slower tempo, holding off on developing your board until you have an opening that you've created by using your interaction. Think of it like cooldown abilities in a video game. Once you're out of mana there, it doesn't matter how many times you spam the R button. Last is strategy. Once I have an idea of what my opponents are doing and what I can do in return, I'll turn my mind to what I'd like to draw in this situation, or even better, what I'll aim to tutor for if I am so lucky. Here we want to use the time while our opponents are making decisions and casting spells to figure out in our mind how our ideal next turn will go, and what we might need to consider if it's not so ideal. In a given match, most players aren't going to meaningfully change your strategy more than a handful of times during a game, as the majority of spells are either taking something away or helping get that player to the thing you should actually worry about. By going through a game with gas in mind, you can keep a clear picture of the relevant pieces of a game without bogging down in what-ifs and maybes. One thing I used to say at tournaments quite a bit when I was judging is that it doesn't matter if you figure out you could have won a game if you can't figure it out before I have to penalize you. While Commander can have much larger and more impactful turns than the average game of, say, Modern, Very rarely do the answers to those sorts of turns change, nor will the cards in your hand change for staring at them. Now that you've heard a little bit about my gas model, let's bring Jim in and chat about his opinion on the framework. Welcome to it, Jim.
Hey, Alex, how you doing?
Oh, you know me, living the dream every day. So you've heard what I've said here. How do you think this fits with how you look at games?
Well, first of all, can I say I love the acronym. I do love the fact that it kind of parallels the way that we use the term gas in Magic colloquially, which is typically, you top deck a card and you're like, oh, this is gas, right? This is going to drive the gameplay. This is going to move things forward. This is going to be explosive and it's going to fuel my plays, right? Mm-hmm. So I like that it kind of fits in with that, where you're like, oh, you're drawing a card, you're making your assessment, you've got gas, right?
Yeah,
it's a really easy way to remember it. But I really do like that framework. It kind of acknowledges the fact that your threat assessment, which we've talked about in the past, can be based on a few different things. It can be based on your assessment of what everybody's trying to do in the game. It can be an assessment based on what you're trying to do in the game, and just kind of making small course corrections throughout the course of the game to try and get you there.
Right, because obviously the goal for everybody's deck and commander is the same, winning the game. The difference is how do you get there? And so that sort of fills in the strategy portion of it. And like you said, keeping an eye on the game state along with the actions you have available is the whole idea. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I really like about it is it sort of moves us from the what already exists into the what can I do about it into the I can't do anything about it, so what am I looking for setup. Yeah. It keeps you from bogging down in the I can't do anything about it phase, where you're desperately trying to figure out, well, if I just opt and then I find this and then I do that and then I also get, at the same time, I draw 2 cards and get a bunch of mana, and it just bogs you down, right? Whereas if you're honest and straightforward and say this to this to this, it keeps things moving. But one thing that I've heard some people ask in the past is, why is invigilating slow play important in a casual format?
Yeah, well, okay, so I should probably note that we don't actually invigilate slow play in a format, but it's something that we have to care about, right? So I've seen a few people on Twitter talk about this recently, about the concept of a chess clock. I've seen Rachel Weeks talk about it. I think Kristen Gregory has been talking about it as well, both CAG members. And it's an interesting concept. The idea of a chess clock, if you've never seen one, if you're not familiar, it's a clock that has 2 buttons on it, one for each player. And it's basically the clock will count down for you as a player until you hit the button to signify that you're done taking actions. And then the play moves to the other player, and they're going to take their actions, hit the button, and send it back to you. So you're kind of passing this ball back and forth, saying, this is how much time I've taken for my own actions. Right.
And in chess, you have a set amount of time to complete the game, just like you do on Magic the Gathering Online. Yeah. And in Arena, you typically see it represented by how long you're allowed to rope for before it auto passes your turn.
Yeah, so you can see that rope animation burning down, where it's like, this is how much time you have before you have to act. And in competitive play, it's enforced. The idea of slow play is enforced because we only have a set amount of time to do events, right? We can't abide by matches that go for 3 hours because we only have maybe 7 or 8 hours while the store is open, if you're playing at a store, to actually totally have your event. That's why a lot of bigger events will go to day 2 instead of just playing into the wee hours of the morning.
I'm trying to imagine a 15-hour Grand Prix all done in one day.
Right, Jeez. And what you don't want is one match holding up the entire tournament because somebody's playing Lantern Control or Miracles or whatever the slow play problem is. Where every game is going, 45 minutes and you've got 3 matches potentially per round. And, it might take 2 or 3 hours if that sort of thing isn't enforced.
Right.
So that's in competitive play. That's why it's outlined in the MTR. We use generally useful shorthands that are developed in the MTR for casual play just because they're useful for us, because we might have a set amount of spare time that we spend per week, as an example, playing Magic, right? You might have 3 hours a week that you can get together with your buds, pop a couple drinks and have fun, right? What you don't want in that situation, if you're being, empathetic and considerate of everybody's time, is one person taking 75% of the time and having the other 3 players split the other 25%. That's generally not fun for people. But, everybody's concept of fun is different, but that is generally not fun for most people.
Yeah, I think a really good way of explaining how slow play works in a commander environment is if your friends are ending up on their phones for longer than it takes to check the text message they just got, someone's probably slow playing. Realistically, if the game isn't holding their attention because nothing's happening, that's a really good indicator to me that something's gone off the rails, whether it's just too much time in the tank, the board state's too complex, or, it does happen that someone's just out of a game for no fault of their own at times. But generally speaking, if everyone's competitive in a game and you see people on their phones, it's because things are taking too long. And so it's important to still try to keep things at a pace. Just because the MTR doesn't bind Commander games doesn't mean it can't inform it. Realistically, the MTR is how most Magic players learn to play the game, whether they know it or not. The very idea of shortcuts, how communication is handled. Heck, a lot of the rules of the games, as they are, actually spur from the MTR, not necessarily the IPG or the comprehensive rules. And so I think it's important to keep, especially the things that make for a good game in the game, rather than just discarding them because it's a tournament rule. So all that said, how can we use the gas model to help people play faster? Well, first things first, board states and game states in Commander are some of the most complex in any game, anywhere at any time.
That's funny about that. When Chris, our local L2 at the time, approached myself and one other person, we were playing a game of Commander, just heads up between games, and he said, "Hey, do you guys want to be judges?" And I said, "Well, I'm not really into like competitive play and all that kind of stuff." And I'm like, "Well, I don't really have like an encyclopedic knowledge of the comprehensive rules." And he said, "Do you play Commander?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Good enough."
Yeah. Well, and in a lot of ways, if you make it into Commander for a significant period of time, you're going to pick up almost all of the relevant stuff. Because just a secret between y'all and me, most of judging is tournament operations. You don't really need to know the rules that well.
Yeah.
And so realistically, if you play Commander, there's a decent chance you might have more rules knowledge than some judges.
Yeah, because more corner case stuff, like standard as an environment or limited as an environment, is like a fairly insular thing, right? In that, like, the only things that are going to come up are probably called out in the set announcements, where they're like, here, these are some weird things that can happen, like having multiple Academy manufacturers in play.
You don't want to do hypergeometric math?
Right. So, but they'll call that out and they'll be like, "Hey, judges, heads up," or you listen to JudgeCast or whatever, and they're like, "Hey, these are the things that could come up, for Innistrad, if there's going to be transforming cards, we know that this stuff's going to come up." But in a game of Commander, it's everything under the sun, right? Like when I was at GP Vegas in 2019, I was sitting around and there were 3 consecutive judge calls from 3 consecutive tables that all started out, "My opponent cast Teferi's Protection." Right? And so it's like, how does phasing work? How does banding work? And like all of this stuff happens in Commander all the time.
Right. And so ultimately, we need to have some compassion for our opponents. It's totally acceptable for them to take more than the standard amount of slow play time that you might see at a tournament, because they have to digest all of the things that are happening around them. That being said, though, if you use this model, you're not going to need to spend all that time when it's your turn. The point of the gas model is this is something you should be thinking each time the game state develops that should impact the actions you're about to take or want to take in response, and that should change how your strategy functions. So when I see someone play something to the board, the first thing I want to figure out is, does this impact my actions? And does this then impact my strategy? Do I want to counter the big beefy beater that I don't have a counter spell for? Alternatively, do I really want to consider countering a bog standard draw spell? Right? There's a couple of very easy rules you can develop for yourself based on the strategy that your deck's going for that allow you to say, these are the types of actions and responses I want to have for these types of game state developments. So the model does work in both directions.
Yeah, so like it kind of ties into our concept of turn zero threat assessment that we've talked about in the past, which is have a concept of what you're trying to do, but also have a general broad strokes concept of what your opponents are trying to do, and that allows you to we have a whole video about this, but it allows you to assess these actions in terms of how far or close it might move somebody to or away from winning, or how far or close it might move you to or away from winning.
Right. And I think the important thing here is what we're really trying to say is, as much as you could think endlessly and deeply and prognosticatively about things that are happening, that impulse is how you end up in decision paralysis. If you find yourself sitting on a priority you've asked for, I think you've already kind of lost the plot of the model a little bit. Realistically, you should only be looking to act on other people's turns if you've pre-decided in your head, that is a line too far and I need to deal with it. If that creature that's coming down needs to be dealt with, that should have already been in your calculus.
Yeah, like when I'm doing this kind of calculation in my head, I'm generally setting deadlines, right? We might even do a video on this, but
Deadlines would be good.
deadlines will be good. But I what I generally do is I say, okay, you know what, somebody's got a Sun Titan, I've got instant speed removal, right? They've cast the Sun Titan and then maybe they've taken another action and I've got priority. Do I want to burn my removal on the Sun Titan even though they're the next player after me in turn order? Or do I want to wait until I'm about to untap, right? Then it still allows me to take advantage of untapping my mana and utilizing mana that wasn't utilized before. But there's no rush, right? So like I don't need to be actively thinking when is the best time to use this removal, because when the Sun Titan comes down, if I've made up my mind that I want to remove it, I've then also set a deadline that says, you know what, I can wait to do that. I can put that off to the future, right? And then all I have to remember is I have something to do before I untap, right? But then what I'm doing is like on the next player's turn, maybe they play a bigger threat. Maybe they play like an Elish Norn or something like that, and it's going to kill all my creatures. Maybe that's something I want to do. But it's still the same deadline, right? It might change the action, but it's going to move the deadline. But you're kind of setting up a delayed trigger for yourself rather than actively, waiting for something to happen. You're saying, okay, you know what, I can wait.
And it's because you've identified what part of the game state, in this case, Sun Titan / Elish Norn, you're most afraid of. And honestly, I'd say that those are two very good examples of how you might make a different choice in your action based on the strategy you're going for. Because Elish Norn is far more disruptive to small creature decks than a Sun Titan is. And contrary-wise, a Sun Titan is probably one of the worst things you're going to see sitting down across from a control shell.
Right.
And so when you look at things like that, don't worry so much about making the wrong play. Make a play that you feel comfortable with based on the information you have in the moment. Ultimately, Magic, any kind of hobby that you have, is all about learning as you go. If everyone was an expert at this stuff from the beginning, the Pro Tour would be way more packed, if you know what I mean. And so don't focus too much on, well, if I get it wrong, I'll feel bad. Focus on, this was right because of X.
Right. And you're not like wrong or bad because you did something that ended up in you losing the game. I think we talked about this last time too, is that like, if the worst thing that happens is you've lost a game of Magic, it still counted as a pretty good day as long as you had fun.
It's a pretty good day. And frankly, you really shouldn't be expecting to win more than 1 in 4 games of Commander. And so when we look at actions, don't get bogged down in thinking to yourself, I should keep this forever, even though this is preventing me from building my board state. Use cards on threats that you decide are good enough. But maybe you're a new player. Maybe you're someone who doesn't know what's good enough. What can you do about that? Right? And in my opinion, ask. You're probably going to be playing with players that have been playing around a lot more than you. They're going to be more familiar with their own deck or maybe the decks of the other people at the table. And unless you're in the most cutthroat of competitive environments, which even in the CEDH world, I don't think is that terribly common, asking your mutual opponent whether or not they think the Elish Norn is removable might be a good idea.
Yeah, so like if I'm sitting down and Elliot's got an Elish Norn across the table from me, next player in turn order is Bill, and he's got the Sun Titan or whatever, Alex, this is the whole, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? Alex, what do you think is the bigger threat here?
Oh, well, I'm on a creature deck, so please remove the Elish Norn.
Exactly, right? And, maybe you've got a little bit of a political deal you can strike there. Maybe you don't. But, it's that kind of thing where you've got a reliable resource at the table to help you do that kind of threat assessment. And, it's not always a situation where, your opponents are going to be like, Pro Tour, earbuds in, sunglasses on, hood up, right? Saying like, "Oh, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to point that out because if you get it wrong, then it's your own fault and you deserve to lose." Most Commander games are not like that. Some are. But
and if that's your bag of clams, make sure you tell people ahead of time, because that is something that I would call out of the norm. And that's okay. You're not wrong for doing it. It's just something you should probably talk to your opponents about.
Yeah, exactly.
And contrary-wise, if you're a new player, talk to your pod about it. Tell them, hey, I might ask for very minor takesies, backsies. I might need help understanding what the board state means at times. Is that something you're comfortable with? Getting permission for things like that not only puts the other players in the right mindset to help you, but also draws attention to the fact that you might be receptive to play advice. Because it's kind of intimidating for people who might be more experienced to just assume that you don't know what you're doing. I don't want to insult you. I don't want to make you feel bad. But by the same token, if I can help you learn or grow or have a better time, I also want to do that.
Well, and that can help. That can have like ancillary benefits on slow play as well. Because if I don't have to like again, I keep drawing, parallels to chess, but if in chess, when you move a piece, the second you've taken your finger off that piece and you're no longer in contact with it, your move is final and you can't take it back, right? If you treat Magic that way, then people are going to be a lot more hesitant to finalize their decision, right? They're going to be thinking, okay, I have to make sure that I take stock of everything and make the correct play because there's no going back once I've put that card on the table, right? Whereas if you cultivate a culture in your play group where, like one thing that we do with the spike feeders, as an example, is we generally allow like limited takesies, backsies. It's kind of like a don't overdo it kind of thing, but it's not the end of the world if it happens, provided the game state can be repaired, which is, the actions can be adequately reversed and you haven't gained any additional information.
Funnily enough, that's actually the same model most judges use for fixing game state problems or game rule violations in competitive tournaments. Because the whole idea behind it is it's not a crime to mess up. It's not some grand conspiracy against the spirit of the game. But by the same token, if I've drawn 5 cards because I misresolved the Blue Sun Zenith into a, say, Consecrated Sphinx, I don't have a good way to back that up.
Yeah, you can't just put them back on top because then you know what the top 5 cards are. Right?
Exactly.
So that kind of thing, we probably wouldn't allow at takesies, backsies. But if I were to cast a Blue Sun Zenith into like a Notion Thief that I didn't realize was on the board or whatever, or maybe I thought it died but it didn't because of whatever reason, if I do that and somebody's like, well, I'm going to draw these cards, I might say, hold up. Like, I didn't realize that was there. Do you mind if I take that back? And we've found that in our play group, that makes for a better, lighter atmosphere because people don't get punished for stuff that, they would have made a different decision if they had all of the relevant information in their brain,
Don't be too hard on folks that don't have as a developed sense for the game state as you do. The only way people get there is by trial and error, learning the things that make their deck function or not function. And assuming everyone has to have your level of knowledge to compete isn't a great way to get more people to your level to compete.
Yeah.
And so especially if you're playing friendly home games or, just a casual night at the old LGS, try to use your powers for good. One way that you can make sure to not use your powers for good is to lie to someone directly about whether or not you're the threat. And I think it's very important, especially when we talk about asking for help, that if you're the type of person that's providing that type of help, that you be honest and straightforward. You can absolutely say, and I would encourage you to do so, if there is an objectively correct play that involves you losing something, it's okay for you to say that. It doesn't make you a bad player. It doesn't mean that you've failed yourself in some way. This isn't going to happen, go down in the annals of history forevermore that you punted a game because you helped some player remove your own stuff. But what it does do is it makes that player more likely to come back and play. It makes that player more likely to understand what they're doing, and you're going to have more fun in the future.
Yeah, and like I would even extend that to things like another judging concept is free and derived information, right? Yeah. Is that, free information and derived information generally in high-level competitive play, you don't have to assist your opponent with derived information. The main example is, what's your Goyf's power and toughness, right? And you're not allowed to misrepresent it, but you also don't have to help your opponent get there to figure out how much you're attacking them for, right? In casual REL, rules enforcement level, for those that are unfamiliar, all derived information, like if you go to a pre-release at a store, all derived information is free information. So you're expected to help your opponent calculate something that they should reasonably know how to calculate themselves, but they're trying to cultivate that environment of, not punishing people for being less experienced, right? We're not looking to leverage, better rules knowledge or whatever as a way to punish people or like encourage them to screw up, So, in a situation like that, you might have a Dryad Arbor on the board or whatever, but it's underneath one of your forests and you're playing the From the Vault version. It looks like a forest. And, maybe you're on webcam play where you can't discern the cards very easily and somebody's about to tack into you. That's a situation where you might be able to say like, hey, just so you know, before we like move past the point of no return here, I've got a Dryad Arbor and they're going to trade or something like that, It's the kind of thing where, if you have information that's, either free or derived information that your opponent should have access to, it's going to help move the pace of the game if you point it out proactively when it becomes relevant.
And so when we talk about pieces like that, it doesn't hurt you more than it helps you in the long run, because ultimately there's going to come a time when you've missed something and you don't know about it. And if you cultivate that type of atmosphere and that type of reputation as someone that helps out, chances are you're going to benefit just as much as your opponent benefited.
Yeah, for sure.
And so one of the pieces that I really want to touch on with this is I'd like to try and show you how the gas model works from my own point of view on some live gameplay. So we're going to pull up one of our more recent episodes of Spike Feeder gameplay, and I'm going to talk you through what I was thinking as it happened. So as you'll see here, we're coming into about turn 6 of our most recent gameplay episode. We're jumping in right at the time when Bill casts Windfall. So we're going to be discarding our hands and drawing some new cards. Now, in this model, the time at which you're going to spend most of your time thinking about what you're doing and going through the gas model is when you get a new card, because that's when you have the most new information happening. And so at this point in time, if we look around the game state, I'm going to highlight a few different pieces. First of which is the fact that Jan has been attacking for value over and over and over the past few turns. I'm getting concerned about how much mana through treasures he's been able to generate, and frankly, he's been targeting me, which isn't unreasonable. I have a very developed board state. I mean, look at all these angels. It's pretty cool. So, at the time, I had an Akroma's Will in hand, which would have allowed me to attack into Jan and actually kill him that turn. Well, if I would have been able to tap with it anyway. And so, the next piece that happens after this is we draw into a whole new set of cards, and almost none of them are relevant. We're going to skip forward in time just a little bit. Now, as we look at this board state, right before I attack, we still have the same material conditions. Bill hasn't really developed the board all that much. There's not that much to worry about from Jim, aside from the Mastwood Nexus, which I definitely have my eye on, and even more now. Shoutouts to Quad Nines for helping him just completely destroy us. Spoilers for our last gameplay episode, by the by. And at this point, I think to myself, I'm going to attack Jan. Now, if I'd been paying close attention, the very thing that made me want to attack him may have also influenced me not to do so. He had a whole bunch of open mana and had just drawn 7 new cards in colors that are very famous for their reactive ability. And so I thought to myself, if I can get him out of the game, I can probably overwhelm and overrun the red deck, and then I and the control deck sitting next to me can duke it out towards the end.
Right.
So that was my strategy as we move forward. Now, obviously, as you saw at the beginning of this video, it didn't go so well for me. But these are the pieces that I was thinking during the entire time we were having that fun, lighthearted conversation in the middle. I didn't have to spend too much mental energy processing on it because I had already made some decisions about what I did care about and what I didn't care about. And as a result, I made a choice. And in this specific instance, it was a little bit suboptimal.
He got punished. He got punished.
But I didn't have to paralyze myself and the rest of the game state trying to figure out who to go after. Mm-hmm. And so I think if you take examples like this and apply it to your own games, especially in these middle turns when things get kind of hairy, you can cut through some of the noise. Like, for example, Opposition Agent basically doesn't affect me at this point in the game. But other players might have tunnel visioned on it because it's a boogeyman card.
Me. I was tunnel visioning on it because it was preventing me from searching with Magda. So on the flip side, my assessment of the board was I have to get rid of this opposition agent. I ended up getting really lucky because I chef kissed a Swords to Plowshares or Path Exile. I think it was a Path Exile. Yeah. And it just happened to hit the opposition agent, which was great, by the way.
Mm-hmm. But would you say it was?
Yeah, that's all we have time for today. So, yeah, the threat assessment can vary from player to player, which we know. But that was like, at that point in the game, it was right after Bill had cast the opposition agent. I was like, you know what, I have to get rid of this opposition agent, come hell or high water. You know, I need to jump on any opportunity where I can do that. And that was where the Chef's Kiss came in.
Mm-hmm. And so similarly, the ability that I was looking at using was the ability on my Angel of Finality, I think was the name of it. Mm-hmm. The one that kills players if I've got a whole bunch of life and I've attacked them. That was the ability that I was using to further my strategy of combat-based overwhelming my opponents. And so using this framework and employing some of the communication techniques we've talked about isn't going to just make you a better player. It's going to make your pod better because you're going to be able to help out your opponents because you will have thought through some of these things. And if they come to you and if Jim had said, hey, Alex, what are you most worried about on the board right now? I would have been able to walk him through your Mastwood Nexus, Jan's creatures, and Bill's hand. At that point in time, those were the things I was most worried about. And through that, Jim could also tell me that he was most worried about Opposition Agent.
And something else. I don't know. I don't know what else I was worried about. I was sitting pretty the entire game, except for the Opposition Agent.
Oh, there you go. And so you don't have to worry too much about every single little piece on the board if it's not an interactive component. And furthermore, even after I got Aether Spouts, you'll notice that I pivoted and said, okay, I'm going to put certain cards on top, that I'm going to use my Codex Shredder to get back into play because I have a reanimation strategy. And in this way, each individual piece of the model informs the others. So if you're going to use this at home, here's what I suggest. When you draw new cards, walk through in your head, how does this change the game state? How does it change the actions I'm able to take? And does it further one or more of the strategies that I'm going for? Go for that. Communicate honestly about it, and you're going to have a good time.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good place to end it off. This was a really good, very informative. I learned a few things here. So thanks so much, Alex.
Absolutely. And you folks keep in mind, gas, gas, gas.
Hey, thank you for checking out the Spike Feeders on YouTube. If you're not subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button before you close the window. Or you can click on this link to check out our other great videos.